Imagine this: you're 67 years old, rich beyond measure, but still searching for something that money can't buy: love. You've buried 2 husbands, divorced 2 more, and you're no stranger to loneliness. But this time you meet him. A 33-year-old man, smooth-skinned, with a smile that could light up the darkest room. He calls you baby, holds your hand in public, and makes love to you like you're the only woman in the world. You think it's finally happening, true love. But sometimes the flames you play with can burn you. And in this case, they could cost you your life. Right. He's the perfect man, the one Dorothy May Washington has been waiting for. Handsome, kind, and attentive. But Dorothy doesn't know that Ray isn't looking for love. He's after something far more valuable: her fortune. And when a wealthy woman with a weakened heart stands between a young man and millions of dollars, some will do anything to speed up the inheritance process. This isn't just a love story, it's a tale of betrayal dressed in sweet words and gentle touches. A story where greed wears the mask of devotion. A story that ends not with a wedding but with a funeral. How far would you go for love? And what happens when that love is nothing more than a trap designed for someone else's gain? If you're ready for a true crime story about money, manipulation, and a deadly love affair, stay with me. Let's dive into the life of Dorothy May Washington, a woman who thought she had finally found happiness in the arms of a man who, in the end, would destroy everything she had worked for. Hit that subscribe button and let's begin. Dorothy May Washington, known to her friends as Miss Dot, was a woman who had seen it all. At 67, she had a fortune that most could only dream of: 3 houses, 2 businesses, and a bank account filled with more money than she could spend in a lifetime. Yet, despite all her wealth, there was one thing that money couldn't buy: love. She wasn't born into riches. Dorothy came from humble beginnings in rural Mississippi, where she spent her childhood picking cotton in the scorching sun, her hands raw and blistered from the constant labor. But she wasn't just hardworking, she was smart. Smart enough to get herself to nursing school, smart enough to marry her first husband, a doctor who taught her about investments while she managed his medical practice. And when he died suddenly of a heart attack at 45, Dorothy was left with a life insurance check, a lesson, and a whole lot of money. That was marriage number 1. Nothing glamorous, just a practical love story that ended with freedom. Her second marriage was more calculated. A real estate developer who doubled her money before drinking himself to death. A marriage built on ambition, not affection, and another reminder that life and love were unpredictable. But with each loss, Dorothy gained more wisdom, more wealth, more independence. By the time she married her third husband, a retired judge, Miss Dot was beginning to feel the weight of loneliness. This marriage gave her the respectability she craved, but it didn't last long. 5 years of boredom, followed by another funeral. Dorothy learned that while respect was nice, it didn't fill the empty space in her heart. The fourth marriage was born from desperation. A younger man, only 55, who took half of her money in the divorce. Another failed attempt at happiness, but with it, another painful lesson. Age didn't always equate to wisdom. So, at 67, Miss Dot found herself living alone in a mansion on Maple Street in Jackson, Mississippi. A mansion too big for just one person, with too many rooms and too many memories. Her children from her first marriage were grown, living their own lives in other states. They called on holidays and visited on Christmas, but they couldn't fill the hole she felt inside. They worried about her habit of falling for the wrong men, the way she sought companionship in the wrong places. But Miss Dot wasn't worried about what they thought. She was worried about being lonely. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday when she found herself scrolling through sugarconnect.com, a dating website where older women could find companionship with younger men. She typed out a profile that was part truth, part fantasy. She shaved off a few years, added a few inches to her height, and posted pictures from 5 years ago when she felt the most alive. Successful businesswoman seeks companionship with younger men. Age is just a number. Money is not an issue. Looking for someone who appreciates the finer things in life and knows how to treat a lady like a queen. It didn't take long for the messages to come pouring in. Most were from scammers or men too young for her to consider. But then one message stood out. It was professional, sweet, and most importantly, real. Hello, beautiful. My name is Ray. I'm 33, work in construction, and also an Instagram model. I believe age is just a number when two hearts connect. I'd love to take you to dinner and show you that chivalry isn't dead. A woman like you deserves to be treated like royalty. His words felt like they were meant just for her. No man had ever spoken to her like that, not her ex-husbands, not the men from her past. Ray was different. He had everything Dorothy longed for: youth, charm, and the kind of attention that made her feel young again, desirable again. She didn't know it then, but Ray was exactly the kind of man she was vulnerable to. 3 months later, Ray moved into Miss Dot's mansion. 3 months of perfect dates, perfect conversations, and perfect love, or so it seemed. But little did Miss Dot know, she wasn't just giving her heart to Ray, she was giving him access to something far more valuable. Dorothy had always been a woman of class. Dinner at the finest restaurants, elegant attire, and sophisticated conversations. But when Ray showed up for their first date, he was different. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than he made in a month, yet he carried himself with a quiet confidence that made Dorothy feel something she hadn't felt in years: alive. Their first meal was at the fanciest restaurant in Jackson. Ray was charming, pulling out her chair, offering her compliments that made her blush. Dorothy hadn't felt like this in years. She sat there, gazing at him, seeing him not just as a younger man, but as someone who was finally able to see her. "You're not like other women I've dated," he said as they sipped wine. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried a weight of admiration that caught her off guard. "How so?" she asked, intrigued. "You're real confident. You know who you are and what you want. That's sexy as hell." Miss Dot blushed. Sexy? No one had called her that in decades. Not her ex-husbands, not anyone. But here was Ray making her feel seen, heard, and special. They continued seeing each other, and soon their relationship was more than just casual dates. Ray was perfect, always there when she needed him, always attentive. He listened when she spoke, laughed at her jokes like they were the funniest thing he'd ever heard. It was the kind of attention that Dorothy had yearned for her entire life. 3 months into their relationship, Ray moved into Dorothy's mansion. He had his daughter, Kesha, visit often, which made Dorothy's heart swell. She loved the idea of them becoming a whole family, something she had longed for in her lonely years. Ray, or so it seemed, was everything Dorothy had hoped for. He was kind, considerate, and generous with his time. He would bring her flowers on Fridays, always be there when she needed a hand, and go out of his way to make her feel like the most important woman in the world. They would take long drives through the Mississippi countryside, Ray holding her hand as if it was the most precious thing he'd ever touched. In those moments, Dorothy thought maybe, just maybe, she had finally found someone who loved her for more than her money. But as the days went by, small, almost imperceptible things began to happen. Things that made Dorothy doubt, but only for a moment. She would brush them off, telling herself she was just overthinking. Ray's attentiveness began to shift into something different, something more controlling. At first, it was just little things. He would make all the decisions about their finances, take over handling her bills, and choose where they would go on trips. Dorothy, never one to question his judgment, went along with it, grateful for his effortlessness. One day, Ray came to her with a suggestion. "Why don't we open a joint account? It'll make things easier. We can plan for the future, share everything." It seemed reasonable. They were living together now, building a life together. Why not? But in the back of her mind, Dorothy couldn't help but feel like something was a little off. She dismissed the thought almost immediately because Ray was perfect, and perfect love didn't need to be questioned. So she agreed, and they opened a joint bank account. As the months passed, Ray's devotion seemed to grow. He helped her with everything, organizing the house, taking care of her health. He even arranged her appointments with doctors, making sure she never missed a visit. It felt like true love, and Dorothy was completely immersed in it. But what she didn't know was that Ray had been doing something else behind her back. Something dangerous. He was also learning everything about her, every detail of her life. The way she took her coffee, the medication she took daily, the way she preferred her bed made. He memorized her every move, every habit, because, unbeknownst to Dorothy, this was a game to him. And he was already planning his next move. One evening, as Dorothy walked into their bedroom, she noticed that the dresser drawers were slightly askew. Ray had always been the one to keep everything in its place. He was almost too perfect, but this time she could feel something wasn't quite right. When she asked about it, he laughed it off. "I've been moving things around a bit, honey. I'm just trying to keep things fresh." She nodded, telling herself it was nothing. But in the back of her mind, something gnawed at her. She brushed it away, thinking she was just overthinking again. But just when Dorothy thought everything was perfect, a small mistake Ray made would soon set everything in motion. A moment of carelessness that would start revealing the cracks in the perfect facade. Over the next few weeks, Ray's behavior began to shift subtly. At first it was small things. He always insisted on paying for everything even though Dorothy offered. She brushed it off as his chivalry. But then he started making decisions without asking her. It was as if her opinions no longer mattered. One evening Ray suggested, "Let's combine our finances. It'll make everything easier." Dorothy hesitated. It felt too soon, but Ray reassured her. We're building something together, right? This is just a step toward our future. Reluctantly, she agreed. It wasn't just the money. Ray started taking control of other aspects of Dorothy's life too. He made decisions about what she wore, where they went, and even when she saw her friends. He was always there. She told herself it was out of love, but deep down, something didn't feel right. One day, Ray bought a new set of expensive clothes. I thought I'd treat myself, he said, flashing her a smile that made her heart skip. Dorothy didn't question it, but her gut told her something was off. It was the small things that began to add up. She was losing control, but she didn't know it yet. She told herself, he just cares about me. He wants to help. But her instincts were beginning to tell her otherwise. The line between love and manipulation was starting to blur, and Dorothy was too deep in to see it clearly. Dorothy had always trusted her instincts, but now they were starting to feel like distant whispers. One evening, as she was sorting through some old files in her office, she found a receipt for a luxury watch Ray had bought. A watch far too expensive for someone claiming to be a construction worker. Her heart sank. She had never questioned his spending before, but this was different. When she confronted him, Ray flashed his usual charming smile. It was a gift for my father, he explained smoothly. I wanted to surprise him. Dorothy wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. But a small voice in her head kept whispering, why did you hide it? The doubts didn't stop there. Ray had been too perfect, always attentive, always loving. But his perfection felt like a performance. He had no flaws, no bad habits, nothing that made him human. Even their arguments, if they ever had one, seemed to resolve too quickly, too easily. A week later, she noticed something else. His phone was always with him, always. He would never leave it unattended, even for a moment. The same phone that once sat casually on the counter was now kept locked away in his pocket, out of her sight. Just being cautious, he told her when she asked about it. You never know who might try to hack into your stuff. Dorothy smiled weakly. But deep down she knew. The perfect man she had once seen as her salvation was starting to feel more like a prisoner in his own web of lies. The first crack had appeared, but would it be enough to wake her up before it was too late? It all came to a head one night when Dorothy was alone in the house. Ray had gone out and she was tidying up the living room when something caught her eye. It was an envelope tucked behind the stack of papers on the side table. She opened it, expecting bills or documents. Instead, inside was a bank statement, one that didn't belong to her. Her heart raced as she scanned the figures. The statement had her name on it, but the account was clearly not hers. It was a joint account. And it was filled with money that had mysteriously appeared in large sums over the past few weeks. Her pulse quickened as she read the names of various transactions. Large payments to unknown companies, cash transfers to offshore accounts. In that moment, the truth hit her like a ton of bricks. Ray had been using her money. He had manipulated her into opening joint accounts, and he had been transferring funds all along, slowly draining her assets without her realizing. But it wasn't just about the money. As her mind raced, she thought back to everything she had overlooked. The perfect persona, the constant need to control, the way he always made decisions for her. Everything she had dismissed as love was nothing more than manipulation. When Ray walked through the door hours later, he didn't look surprised to see her holding the envelope. In fact, he seemed almost prepared. I can explain, he said, his voice smooth, but there was a coldness behind his eyes. This isn't what you think. Dorothy's hand trembled as she slammed the envelope onto the table. You've been lying to me. You've been stealing from me, Ray. Who the hell are you? Ray's expression didn't change. You wanted to be loved, Miss Dot. And I gave you that love. But I'm not here to be your Prince Charming. I'm here to take what's mine. Her world shattered. The man she had trusted, the man who had made her feel special, was nothing but a fraud. Ray wasn't in love with her. He had been after her money all along, and now he was ready to claim it. Dorothy sat there, frozen, as the full weight of the betrayal sank in. She had loved him, she had truly believed that Ray was the one. The man who had promised to treat her like a queen had turned out to be a master manipulator, using her vulnerabilities to fuel his greed. I trusted you, she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. Her hands shook as she grabbed the envelope again, staring at the bank statement, still unable to process it fully. How could you do this to me? Ray's expression remained emotionless. You were easy, he said coldly. You wanted someone to care for you, to love you. I gave you that. And now I get what I'm owed. In that moment, everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and companionship was stripped away. This wasn't love. It was a game where she had been the fool. Her heart ached as the realization set in. Ray had never cared for her. He had used her to get what he wanted, and once he had it, he discarded her without a second thought. Her thoughts turned to her children, David and Patricia. They had warned her. They had seen through Ray from the beginning, but she had dismissed their concerns, too desperate for love to see the truth. The guilt washed over her like a tidal wave. They had tried to protect her, and now it was too late. But there was no time to wallow in self-pity. Ray had left her with nothing but shattered trust and an empty heart. She had to act. She couldn't let him walk away with everything. But it was going to take more than just money to fix the damage he had done. It was going to take her strength, her resolve, and her will to survive. The truth hit her hard. But Dorothy May Washington was not a woman who gave up easily. She had survived poverty, widowhood, and heartbreak. She had made it this far. Now it was time to fight back. Dorothy sat in her mansion, surrounded by the quiet emptiness of a life she thought she had built with love, only to discover it had been built on lies. Ray had taken everything, her money, her trust, and her faith in the idea of love. But he hadn't taken her spirit. As the days passed, Dorothy realized that the real betrayal wasn't just in the money he had stolen. It was in the trust she had given him, the love she had handed over without question. She had let herself believe that someone would love her for who she was, not for what she could give. But Ray had shown her the harsh reality. Not everyone was after true love. Some were after something far more valuable. She thought about her children, David and Patricia, and how they had tried to warn her. They had been right all along. But now it was too late to change the past. All she could do was move forward, learn from her mistakes, and rebuild her life. Dorothy knew that she could never be the same woman she was before. But perhaps that wasn't a bad thing. She had learned what was truly important: self-respect, boundaries, and the importance of trusting herself first. Dorothy's journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. She would rebuild her life, stronger, wiser, and more cautious than before. She would never allow herself to be manipulated again. And though her heart would always carry the scars of betrayal, she knew she was finally ready to live for herself. "You know," Dorothy said quietly to herself, staring out the window at the sunset, "sometimes it takes losing everything to realize what you had all along."